During COVID, there wasn't much happening, so I decided to do some writing about my life. I thought, why not? And so I did. And I'm now going to read you some little bits from it. Okay, so I arrived in Toronto in the early 60s, and I started auditioning for TV. The first part I got was in a series called First Person, and this episode that I was in was called At the Railing, and it starred Martha Henry in the very first TV thing that she ever did. Also in the cast was Robert Goulet, and it was directed by David Gardner. Anyway, in those days, I have to tell you that the casting department for the CBC was above Basil's Restaurant on Gerrard and Yonge Street. And outside each director's office would be sitting his script assistant, and yes, in those days it was always a he. And usually I would ask the assistant, oh, is he doing anything that I could do? And sometimes they said yes, and sometimes they said no. Anyway, I did my rounds every week, and then I would return the following week with the same old question. Is he doing anything I could do? Anyway, my luck changed when I saw Brigitte Helbig sitting out Robert Allen's office. And I asked the question, and the reply was, oh, well, yes, maybe. And she handed me the script for a play called Royal Gambit. It was a play about Henry VIII and his 6 wives. Brigitte suggested that I read for Jane Seymour. So I had a look at it, and 20 minutes later I was reading for Robert Allen, who was directing it. And he let me look at several of the other queens and then thanked me for coming in. It was some time before I actually heard that I would be playing Jane Seymour. Now, this was the biggest part I'd ever played on TV, and it had an experienced cast with Kate Reid and Catherine Blake and a whole bunch of other people that were quite well known. Tanny Seitz, an American actress, was brought up from New York to play Anne Boleyn. And Peter Ustinov was offered Henry, but he turned it down. And in the end, Albert Drake took the part. I've got several photographs of him lying on top of me. One of which he sent to my husband, and on the back he wrote, "All in a day's work." So during the 60s, I got quite a lot of TV work, and sometimes I'd be rehearsing 2 plays at once. In those days, most of the dramas were by English writers, and that was fine for my accent. We always had a long rehearsal period because everything was live in those days, not like today, and so we got a chance to get to know our fellow actors. One of my favorite directors was Norman Campbell, and it was a sad day for me when he decided to, move from drama into ballet and opera. Anyway, I want to tell you about this though. So the longest audition I ever had was with George Luscombe for his Toronto workshop productions. I don't remember how I heard that he was actually auditioning actors, but anyway, I went down to his studio on Fraser Avenue, which is miles along King Street West, and the year was, I think it was 1964. So George weeded out the applicants, and about a dozen of us were chosen for the months-long audition. And then more of us would be sent home. George has spent several years working with Joan Littlewood's company in London's East End, and he was modelling his company on her innovative method. So every morning we would lie on the floor and breathe in, out, etc. And then we'd be on our feet walking like a chicken or a donkey or whatever animal George had decided for us for that day. but we'd also do some improv, which I preferred. It was at the end of about a 3.5-week period that he began the process of forming his company. Choosing the first 3 actors was just a start. I was not one of those. And the remaining actors would just have to go back to being chickens. I tried harder, on the floor, on my feet, waving my arms the way I thought a chicken could be represented more successfully. A few days later, 2 more actors were chosen. Again, I was not one of those. I tried even harder. Now it was down to 2 of us, and George told us that he would choose the final actor after lunch. I stuck my face in my tuna fish sandwich and returned for the last call. This was when I heard my own name called. Oh, it was me! He wants me! Oh, now I could hold my head up high and face the world. George wanted me. But how much would I be paid? Well, it turned out there'd be a waiting period for this. So the play chosen for our first production was called Before Compiègne by Jack Winter. It was a play about Joan of Arc, and Victoria Mitchell was cast as Joan. And me? Again, George took his time. I remained hopeful, and a few days later, he announced the full cast. I waited to hear my name, which didn't take long. And Louise Nicol will be doing props. Oh no! I tried to hide my disappointment. This was not what I'd been hoping for. Well, in spite of running around finding those darn props, I still took part in the daily exercises and the improvs. If I worked hard enough, I thought, well, surely George would give me a part in the next play that he would directed at the theatre in the Round on the 2nd floor of the Manulife building on Bloor Street. Well, a few weeks went by before Compiègne made it to the stage. Victoria Mitchell was a wonderful Joan, and towards the end of the run, with my name on the programme as props, George came to me and said that from now on, I would be paid. At last! But, would I have a part in the next play? I was too insecure to ask. However, my life suddenly changed when I found out I was pregnant. I waited 3 weeks before telling George. Would it matter, I wondered? I had worked with him for so long without being paid, and now I was about to get my 4th check. The timing was definitely off. I screwed up my courage and gave him my news. He smiled, but told me that under the circumstances, it would be safer for my baby if I left the company. In other words, I was fired. I walked out that day and went home to prepare for my new part, that of a real mother. I never saw George again.